of their portfolio. They should discuss what's happening in the country. They feel as though they are under no obligation, which from a journalistic perspective is completely and totally wrong. I think I will end with that, and I thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Hasan. That was very useful and very informative discussion and presentation. Now, I think I would like you and Paul to, if Paul, you with us? Hello. Hello. Okay,
Hi,
I guess,
hey,
yeah.
I'm here.
So I just want to allow people to ask some questions, but while people are probably thinking about their questions, maybe I will take advantage of that and start myself. So thanks, Paul. I think the issue about data you described, that was very timely as we now head towards election, and then I couldn't help but notice Somali passports. In fact, we had some discussion about data and passports, and not only Somalia, but also in developed countries, even in Australia, there was a case where date of birth was showing XXXX instead of the DDMM. So the data problem is not unique only to developing countries, but even in a country like Australia, we can face challenges like this. But I want to also thank you for the effort we put into this, or you did particularly, and Dr. Serge, and about early on, we were trying to get the ID management project manager in Somalia, in fact, 2 years ago, and then last year as well. And also the work you did with Abdesalam, who's going to join us this afternoon. But I guess with that preamble, the question I really want to ask is, are there any tips that you can share with the Somali community as we move forward? If we have to leapfrog or we have to move fast or to catch up, where do you think we should really start? And this is really for the Somali audience and Somali, for the government. And the question for Hasan after that is there any way we can educate our Somali folks about the social media and media in general? And if so, what would you like to recommend? So I'll let you, Paul, to have the floor first, and then Hasan to follow. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. And just quickly, I think the trap in this is to see one functional area as the right place to start. There's this trap of, okay, well, we'll start with voter registration because that's our priority. We'll start with financial record because that's our priority. Health, education, so on. Any one of these areas is in fact a great candidate to start with. I think the trap is in choosing one because it looks like a sweet spot. Really what we need to be focusing on, in my view, is where does it make most sense to start in terms of capability? And really, we need to undertake that assessment to say, okay, if we're starting with foundational records for Somali citizens, what do we need to do? What are the right capabilities? And from there, then let's choose the first functional starting point. And I think what needs to take place, in my view, is some technology assessment, not at the ground level, not with the end users, but at those points of implementation, whether it's the salary within the health and ambulances that are operating in Mogadishu, or whether it's some other area to better support the unbanked. I really don't mind. That needs to be a decision of the Somali people. But what I can do is support that decision by helping with the technology assessment that needs to take place. And so that we get it right, well, I don't want to say once, because the reality with ID systems is they're never once. They're going to have to be incremental and advanced. But so that we get it best first time, is what I would say. So, and again, so I don't want to name the spot. What I'd like to say is, let's do the assessment so that we get the best spot. If I could leave it at that.
All right. Well, thank you, Hasan.
Thank you, Mohammed. I think what I would recommend is, obviously, as I mentioned, better training for journalists, maybe creating and establishing, if they do not already exist, training colleges or schools or universities for journalists. but also rules and regulation around what media can broadcast and what they cannot is very essential in every society. So in other words, what people are hearing has to be somehow not curtailed in the sense of free speech, but to make sure that things which are not detrimental to the community are not broadcast. But I think one of the most important also, and I highlighted this in my speech, is if the people in charge, if the people who are running the country are not saying things about where the country is, then others will say it for them. And what the others will say are not necessarily truth of the matter and does not reflect the reality. So it's combination of better training for journalists, better rules and regulations around media entrepreneurs and media companies, and also and media itself. There has to be some sections of the media who actually scrutinize and check on what goes in and out of the other media outlets. So the media has to self-regulate in some sense. And that's the only way you can actually control the misinformation and the fake news from this social media outlets outside the country, which are really complicating the country's attempted to go back to normal life and a peaceful life.
All right, well, thank you. I guess we'll allow other people to ask questions. So if there are any questions, please, the protocol is you raise your hand, and by no means you can. And if not, I still have more questions. So are there any other questions? Yeah, I think we've got Hamid. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Hasan. Thanks, Paul. I got two questions, one each. If I start with Hasan, I don't know whether it's the right question to ask you by being far away from Somalia, but do you see sometimes some terrorists, some kind of organized groups that maybe barrack one party or current government or opposition or whatever they be, Nawad and things like that, specifically designed to sort of make a lot of noise and confuse, not as an individual freedom of sort of expressing themselves, but as a group of, you could say, noise from one side of the government of the opposition. Do you notice something like that, especially in the social media? And my question to Paul is, as someone who came from an industry that is very critical to IDs and KYCs and the current environment of making sure that money goes from one place to another safely. Just to give you a brief background, I sort of bought of one of the Somali remittance companies. I was kind of a co-founder of one of the current remittance companies in Somalia, not anymore, but spent a good time of my sort of last 10 years. And currently helping a bank in Somalia to have kind of a technology and infrastructure and innovation and all that. Do you share some of the research that you do, entities like private companies in Somalia? And specifically, I'm interested when you were talking about the foundational identification systems and the functional ID systems. In particular, the functional, I'm really impressed the way you were putting, when you're talking the tax and salaries and, you know, making sure that small entities rather than the national level. And the reason I'm asking this is banks are okay, which I'm currently working with, but remittance industry is a bit chaotic. They really do a good job when it comes to identification, making sure that they know who they're dealing with. But unfortunately, developed countries where the inflow, the outflow of the remittance comes from countries like Australia, for example, a good example. It's very difficult when it comes to what they call the last mile. You might recall what happened to Westpac recently in Australia, where they were hit a very hefty penalty. So this research you guys are doing, is it accessible to people like banks in Somalia, remittance companies in Somalia? Can they also add some practical things? How open are you to sort of, you got your own objectives and aims or whatever, but is there a room where whatever you did, rather than reinventing the wheel, sharing that information, and also maybe give more information to you that so that anyone else can understand what's happening on the ground in Somalia? It's a bit wordy, but that's my question. Thank you both.
Yeah, well, maybe you will start with Hasan. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Hamid, for that question. It's obvious there are a lot of individuals online on Facebook who do not hide where they stand when in terms of political division in the country, and you would know as soon as they speak which side of politics they're supporting and what where their opinion lies. Now, these people are not known for having a balanced opinion on things. The words accuracy and impartiality does not really equate to what they talk about. Now, obviously, some of these would support the government, others will support the opposition. Now, I don't know if there is any organized groups or there is an organization. There has been or there have been allegations, well-documented allegations. I think some of the right organizations have actually said there were evidence of individuals being paid to speak and defend the government policies, or particular group of people were paid. Again, there were allegations. I have no evidence of that. But it's clear that any individual who comes on social media, on Facebook, one way or the other, would have clear set of opinion, where they either defending or opposing one side of politics in the country. But whether they are organized and whether they paid on, I cannot say that, except what some organizations, rights organizations, alleged to have happened.
Thank you. Well, can you?
I'm an academic, and we are very happy to be sharing our research. So, Hamid, the short answer to your question is an absolute and unqualified yes. As you would know, perhaps better than most, the area of identity that you're speaking about in terms of remittance and some of what has taken place in Australia is one of the most vexed areas and problematic areas. But certainly, I think the only way to resolve this area long term is to establish a strong foundational ID system, to undertake those technology assessments. And those technology assessments might be assessments in place to support organizations like banks and like remittance companies. the kind of work we're doing, to explain a little bit more deeply but not get too technical, is we're following a model developed out of Oxford University for capability maturity assessment around cybersecurity. But what we're doing is saying, well, what if we apply a similar model to understanding what are the most important capabilities in terms of just an ID program, and you know, specifically a national ID program, but I kind of agree with you that if a lot of success is happening at much lower levels around ID, in just the successful establishment of trustworthy KYC systems for financial institutions, for example. So short answer, yes, very happy to share our work with you. Very happy to stay in touch on that if you want to get in touch and to see what we can do going forward. I also know that this is an area, Mohammed, that you have very strong interest in as well. So if you'd like to add anything to that, please feel welcome.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I guess we were in the news recently. I'm sure you probably saw this on the ABC, but it's not an area I want to go into that now. But by no means, to me, I believe in sharing knowledge and exchanging ideas. And I think that's what academia is all about. So yes, I agree with you, Paul. And as we move forward, perhaps we can even formally engage with some of the government authorities or the university and so on. And this afternoon, there'll be more on this topic from Hasan and the Somali School of Government and Peter Lang, who will also do the work he did with the World Bank. But there is someone who surprised me here. Ware in Istanbul is still awake and he has got some questions for you. So Ware, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. A couple of quick points for Hasan and for Paul. Paul, I think thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I would very much agree on the need to establish a neutral, professional, standalone ID system that does not bleed into other considerations. A particular area of concern, for example, if you let the ID system to be used, for example, to access, for example, services. If, for example, as many agencies, WFP is the perfect example. Now they are using biometrics to access food. That I think should be separate and on its own. One can debate the merits of biometric access to food and shelter and so on and so forth, basic needs, the security of that data, the moral issues and so on and so forth. But if then you use, if you say you want to use national IDs for something like that, then it will open the door for fraud and for trying to get national IDs on false pretenses, simply because of the need and situation involved. So I would very much support the establishment of a purely non-political, non-controversial database for the country that will be what it is, a national ID, no less, no more. Of course, there are issues that need to be worked out. One is to ensure that the national ID system is not politicized. In the hyper-political nature of Somalia, everything is politicized. So you want to make sure that access to the ID database should not be for or against one particular group. That more areas should not come more into the. In the last few weeks, there was reports in the social media that there were certain clans which were mobilizing to have their clan members registered in the database. The idea is that more of them would be in the database than others, which will have repercussions for voting and so on and so forth. So I think what we need to do is to really firewall the national database from all political considerations. The other issue is security. The security of this database, especially in a fragile country where institutions are not as strong as they need to be. Who is the custodian of this database? How do we ensure that this database does not fall into the wrong hands? How do you ensure fair access by all, and so on and so forth? So I think your approach is the correct one. Let's not worry about voting. Let's not worry about any other thing. Let's have the database, because more and more people will realize that, in fact, you need that as a standalone paper, that, you know, plastic paper that will ensure that you are a citizen of that country and you are able to access those services which are intended for citizens, like passports, again, in the future, voting and so on and so forth. But in the beginning, it needs to start, as you said, as a purely dry, non-controversial, standalone national ID system. Hasan, I hear you on Facebook, you know, trolls and you know, clickbaiting and some of these unregulated personalities that are very famous in Facebook and in other social media platforms. Some of them, as you said, which have followers of the hundreds of thousands. But I think in this day and age, that comes with the territory. Sometimes the cure is worse than the ailment. If we, and having been, you know, on the receiving end as a political figure on many of these trolls and the falsehoods and the libel and the name calling and the, you know, falsehood mongering and so on and so forth, I get you. But as you said, we also have to put our agenda there in the marketplace of ideas. I would say that with all the problems that you have mentioned, having these individuals, even trolls, if it may be, is probably healthier at the end of the day for our political system than if we were to clamp down on them. And while many famous personalities support either the government or the opposition, I would say it will even out in the end. What I am concerned about more is the self-censorship, the creation of a hostile environment for dialogue, the fact that your ideas and your utterances and your writings can get you into trouble, quote unquote, either with the government or with the opposition. I think we need to work on the culture than anything else. As far as journalists are concerned, I completely agree with you. The Somali journalistic profession needs to be revamped. The journalists need to be trained. Their accreditation needs to be well thought through. Some basic laws should be there for libel and for damaging the character and standing of an individual, not only politicians, but everybody else. And the government should have the capability and the means to support that infrastructure in a professional and neutral way. Again, it's a double-edged sword. If that accreditation is used to clamp down on unfavorable journalists and so on and so forth, that's also a problem. So I think this is work in progress. This is by any means not the end of it. But if I had to choose between a situation where we only had mainstream media, very good, very certified, and then that can be more abused than if you have an open, free-for-all, crazy system on social media. So I think this is what we need to learn, what we need to navigate, and we have to find a middle ground as always. It's always in the middle. You can't have it either on the extremes. You can't have free for all where everybody says, you know, anything they want about people. There should be consequences. Also, we need to have a way whereby people can say what they need to say without fear of being clamped down on. You pointed out one very crucial issue, and that is the role of the diaspora journalists or Facebook and other social media personalities who reside in other countries, safety removed from Somalia, but very vocal, and they say things without consequence. I'm not entirely sure what we need to do about those people, because sometimes the hassle and the effort needed to bring them to account is very difficult, sometimes prohibitive. And many of the countries in which they reside will not even, they will say, if you complain to them, they will say, listen, this is part of the freedom of speech that we enshrine in our constitutions and in our lives. But I agree with you, it's a problem for Somalia. I would say it's like, learning, a kid trying to learn to drive for the first time. We will have accidents, we fall over cliffs, we get injured, we wake up again, life goes on. And I think in the end, I hope I'm not too optimistic, things will sort themselves out. But some of the issues you raised are really well articulated and true.
Mohammed, you're on mute at the moment.
That's better now. I'm sorry. Well, I want to thank Ware for staying this late and contributing. And if there are any other questions, we still have a few more minutes left. So over to you. And if there are no questions, I think it was a very busy morning today, and we will adjourn and come back, I think 2:30. No, I don't, it's not, I think, 2:30. In fact, I will be back by 2. I will put a note now saying to that effect, informing people. We just noticed a lot of people are following us via Facebook who are not joined by Zoom. So to be fair to all, I'll put a note saying we are having e-lunch. Everyone is enjoying themselves, and we'll be back in a couple of hours. And this afternoon, we have Salam from Dubai, Biralang from Sydney, and Steve Little and Dennis, who are in New Zealand and in Camberwell, Melbourne, Australia, who will talk about School of Government, mobile money, and